Hey there, and welcome to The Bible Speaks. This is where we bring the stories of the Bible into today's creative process. And that's exactly what we're doing in today's episode. My name is Supreme, and in this episode, we'll be talking about, yep, you guessed it, creativity. Now, let me quickly state that creativity doesn't only have to do with, graphic designers, writers, and the lot, UI, UX designers, and others. As long as you are living, if you are going to be the best at anything that you're doing, then you should be able to think creatively, right? And if you wanted to learn about a concept, who would you go to? Of course, you would reach out to an expert in the field, expert in that particular field that you're trying to learn about, someone who has a track record and who has blazed the trail in that path of life. So, for instance, if you wanted to learn about cooking, you would probably go to a chef or a cook to teach you. Or you would watch their videos on YouTube and see their methods and follow the steps they've given, right? Well, if you want to learn about creativity, the same thing follows. And today, as always, creativity is a very vital skill. I don't know if you've noticed, but it's really vital. If you check the skills that have been recommended by LinkedIn for 2021, 2022, creativity is at the top there. And although it's just named as one of the 21st century skills, it has been a vital skill long before the dawn of 21st century. I just thought you should know that, right? And if you also notice, our world is run by creative minds, people who create things for others to use, people who creatively think up solutions and prefer creative ways to use things that have been made by other creative people. A lot of creativity in that sentence, right? I guess it's sounding like a tongue twister at this point. Anyways, so if I asked you to name the creator with the most used products and systems in the entire world, who would you mention? All right, just take a second to think about it. Let me give you some clues. He's the one that invented what helps planes to fly and ships to sail. He also invented the raw material for paper and iron. Can you think of anybody right now? Well, let me give you a third clue. In fact, every food you can think of must pass through one of his massive inventions. You have to know who I'm talking about right now, right? Have you guessed it yet? If in your mind you were thinking, that can only be God, then you guessed it right. God is the biggest and the best creator in the world over. So it only makes sense to learn creativity from him. And in this episode, God will be teaching us creativity. That's the name of this episode, When God Teaches Creativity, right? And the first place that comes to mind is Genesis, because that's the documentation of God's creative process. At the very beginning, God's creative process at the beginning, the creative process that went into all that we can see today in our world, at least physically. Right, so we're looking at Genesis, and without wasting time, let's jump right in and see God's character and method in creation. Let's allow God to teach us creativity. All right, we'll focus on some verses in Genesis chapter 1 that teach us about God's creativity, the attributes that we can imbibe today. So let's start at the very beginning. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." I want us to stop there for a bit. Now, the heaven and the earth that was created and mentioned in this verse, it didn't look like it does right now. It was in its most basic form, like a blank canvas. I think a blank canvas was even smoother than it, right? Maybe how the canvas looked before, they paint the background color on it. Or yeah, so that's how it looked. It was rough. It wasn't finished, because when you read further, it says that the earth was formless and void. The earth was formless and void. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about God creating the heaven and the earth. Now, from this verse, that's from verse 1, the tip for me would be to start simple. Start simple. Now, start from the simple part and build up from there. In any creative endeavor, whether writing, whether designing, as a social media manager or whatever, creating a new product, a new website, an app, whatever you're doing, you have to start from the simple parts. from the simple parts. And in the following verses, you begin to see how God refines the heavens and the earth and adds features to them. These features were not there at the very beginning. He started simply. And I'll use myself as an example to illustrate this point. I am a writer and a podcaster, obviously. I have found that when I try to start creating from a place of complexity, for example, I may have a word or a sentence ringing in my head for some hours or even days, and I many times I don't want to put these things down, right? But all I need to do, ironically, is to just start writing. Then I'll get more lines as I write, more lines pour out, right? I may not get the complete poem or the complete article at that very instant, but I will get the idea of where it's headed when I start writing. But if I left the idea in my head and waited till it was complete in my head, then nothing will come to life, and I'll end up not doing anything. So I embraced simplicity and just started building precept upon precept. I became much more creative and productive, right? So just pen down those first thoughts. It's beautiful to see that God's process is so similar and simple, so simple that we can actually follow. He started from the simple things, the heaven and the earth. That was formless and void, right? So it's a process that we can actually follow. So please start simple. That's the first tip, first creativity tip, right? And the second one that I would like to state is, I think it's the most important one in this particular verse. It's that God actually created. He did something. He acted. That's the second point. He acted. God created. Many of us are sitting on ideas, sitting on plans, and we're not acting. We're not moving. We're just, like me, having the sentences in our heads. We want to have the complete thing, but you've not made the first step. You've not moved. God didn't hold the idea in his mind, thinking over and over about it. No, he created. Even if, they were in their most basic forms, he actually created something, and you should too. Even though critics could laugh at how basic the work is or how incomplete it is, that's not your business. I mean, you give them something to criticize. You have done more than they can ever do, right? I mean, I was reading a book, Creativity Inc., where Ed Catmull said something that even the most eloquent of criticisms is still worth much less than the most basic form of work. Yeah, I said something like that. I'm paraphrasing now, but just telling you that no matter how basic your work is, no matter how basic your action is, or your creation is, it's still a whole lot more than the most eloquent criticism that will be offered to it. So please do something, start something, right? Start simple. So the first 2 points: start simple, but start. Third point I want to get to is in verse 2, and it's quite similar to the first point, but there's a fine line between them, and you'll see why. Now, it's something that we've read before. It says, the earth was formless and void. This is how, every idea is in its baby state. Every idea in its basic state, in its baby state, every project in its baby states, whether it's a great one, whether it's a small one, they all start out void and without form. The earth was shapeless like an amoeba. It didn't make sense looking at it. It was shapeless. I remember something I also heard in the same book, Creativity Inc. I listened to the audiobook, so when I say heard, yeah, that's what I mean. Creativity Inc., still by Ed Catmull of Pixar. I think it's a treasure trove of creativity ideas, right? But I could just see these things, reading Genesis and actually reading this book. And there's something else he said. He said that if you were to see the biggest and most beautiful creations in their baby state or in their idea state, they would look so ugly and fragile. And now here's me talking. I think it's not strange to see that many creatives, entrepreneurs, and pioneers give up because the product of their first efforts looks so formless and void. They give up when they see what they've written down. They see the first lines to that poem, see the first look of that project, and they're like, nah, this doesn't just make sense. It's stupid. I can't continue. I don't want to waste people's time. And sometimes it's not even the first effort, right? Sometimes it's your fourth effort, sometimes it's your 10th effort, and it still looks formless and void. But if God had given up on the earth and said, you know what, this thing is formless and void, it doesn't even make any sense, where would we be actually? Where would we be? Think about that. It's worthy of note that only the earth was said to be formless and void, not the heaven. Right? I need you to note that it's only the earth that was said to be formless and void. Right? So you may have different ideas, and not all of them will suffer the same fate of formlessness. I need you to note that some will require shorter times of commitment before taking shape. Don't treat all of them the same. Sometimes you get it right at the 3rd time, sometimes you get it right the 10th time, sometimes you get it right the 100th time. Not all ideas have the same lifespan. Give yourself time. The fact that your idea looks shapeless or formless right now, it doesn't mean that that's how it's going to end up. Right? So you're excited that you started, and you started simple, beautiful. Then you looked at your creation, the idea in your head that you finally gave form to. You looked at it and all the excitement just disappeared. Please don't do that to yourself, because even God, the Almighty God, created a shapeless and a void earth, and it had darkness covering it. You're only following in its steps, so just keep at it. That's how creativity flows. Okay, so that's the 3rd point. From there, let's move to the 4th point, and I also love this one so much. I love this one so much, and we will draw this point from the next 3 verses, because as I read this portion, it spoke to me in various ways. Remember, this is the Bible speaks, so I'm just sharing what the Bible spoke to me as I read it, And as I read Genesis chapter 1, it spoke to me about creativity and creation. Our point is in verse 3, but let's read from verse 2 for context. It says, "And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters," or the face of the deep. That's what some translations say. Verse 3, "And God said, Let there be light, and there was light." Verse 4, "And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness." Verse 5, "And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day." So in verse 3, God says, "Let there be light," and there was light. Notice that as a response to the darkness that was on the face of the deep, he did not remove the darkness. Instead, he introduced light. You may start out a project not knowing everything that you need for it, but as you go along, you need light on that particular subject. You need to learn and gain knowledge about that project. Add knowledge and skill. It's very important in this context, talking about light being knowledge and skill. Don't waste time complaining about how complex the project is or how hard it is, how difficult. No. Add skill, add knowledge. There are a lot of resources out there you can learn, and many times if you ask the Holy Spirit, he'll guide you and lead you to places where you can actually gain knowledge. There are a lot of course websites. There's the University of YouTube. Please, people, use it. Use it, because I think information is everywhere. You can learn anything you want. Many times you don't even have to pay. You can learn these things for free. I know of some people who say it's they are programmers, computer programmers, and for every project they have to go online and learn. Okay, for every bug that they encounter, they have to go Google, check out this, and they can solve it. They resolve it, and they move to the next one. That's how creativity flows. All right, and God introduced light. He said, "Let there be light." There was darkness, but he introduced light. For me, that's what I learned here. Add skill, add knowledge. So in this context, light can be knowledge and it can be skill, but it can also be something else. So please just follow me. Now, verse 4 says, "God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness." Then verse 5 says, "He called the light day, and the darkness he called night." To explain this, let me use myself. So apart from being a writer and a podcaster, I'm also a social media manager. So I create posts and manage some social media pages for different clients. Sometimes a client gives you a brief And as a professional, you would rather do away with certain elements of that brief because you're just thinking, this doesn't work. It's going to stifle the process. It's going to, stifle the growth of this brand. But your client is insistent on those things. They want those things to be included. Now, it's like darkness that you would rather do without, right? In this case, those elements are like darkness. But you leave them in and you work with them because, you're a professional and customer is always right. And somehow in the future, those elements turn out to be of use, right? Those elements turn out to be of use. This is not always the case, right? But it happens sometimes that you were not saying what the client was saying. And because you followed them, you got to say, oh, wow, okay, now I see. But what if, the darkness that you wanted to remove, what if that feature that you wanted to remove from that brief, what if it could turn out to be a very vital element of your project later and you actually removed it at the beginning? What if God actually removed darkness and said, you know what, I bind you, darkness, I bind you, instead of just introducing light? Because he knew, God is all-knowing, so he knew that the darkness was going to serve as night later on. So also you must see certain obstacles in your way, in your creative process as tools. When with different clients that I've worked with, I found that this principle has made my work so easy. So sometimes the client has an emotional attachment to a certain element in the brief. Maybe it's a color. They don't care if it has done more harm to the brand. Maybe they have too many active colors in their brand image and they want to keep it by all means and they want you to make it work. You're the professional, you're supposed to make it work, right? When this is the case, I introduce an alternative, right? You can say I call for light, right? But yeah, I introduce an alternative and that way we even out everything. And let me give you another practical example. So if a client has two strong brand colors too, and they are unwilling to change any one of them. Take, for instance, a dark green and a dark blue color. They have these two. Those are not very active colors. Those are dark colors, so I'm just going to use them off the top of my head. Right now, you have the job of making their Instagram feed look pleasant, amongst other things. What do? I introduce a more pleasant color that works with both of those colors. Introduce a third color that works with them, that makes everything even, mild and pleasant. Tweak the fonts a bit and present it to them, and just like that, everybody's happy, I'm happy, they're happy because it looks pleasant now and they still have their colors, right? You see what I did there? I made darkness and light work together. That's what God did, right? Bringing a light, introducing light, right? So what I'm saying is, creative people, they don't throw away the darkness, they use it. You don't throw away obstacles, you use it. Am I saying that every obstacle can be used? No. But many times the obstacles will actually give you a better chance at being more creative. Creatives don't whine about the darkness. A creative person doesn't. You just call for the light, call for the alternative, call for knowledge, call for skills, right? There's light, there's always light. You just have to call it forth. The fact that you only see darkness doesn't mean that that's all there is. Right? The fact that you were only given two options doesn't mean that you can't create a third. You're a creative, so you're a creator. Let me just add that. and let me say that when ordinary people see darkness, creators see opportunity. So you have to think about it. Are you a creative? The fact that you're created by God, it shows that you're a creative, you're a creator. So please don't live like a powerless person. Right, so that's the fourth point, and let's jump to the fifth and the final point that we'll talk about in this episode. Now, we'll look at verse 4, which we read before. It says that God saw that the light was good. That's an appraisal. God saw that the light was good. That's an appraisal, that's feedback, that's an assessment. God gave an assessment about his work. And you should too. Now, when you're creating things, when you're writing an article, when you're making social media posts and whatever, you should be able to assess your work and tell if this actually works. Is it good enough? Is it good enough? It wasn't when God gave the assessment about his work, it's not out of pride or an act of mediocrity, because some of us will say that God hasn't really done much, so why would he call it good? Why would he praise his work when he's still so early in the process? And I will only tell you this: when you appraise your work, you see what actually works and what needs fixing. So you're looking at your work, you're looking at what you've been doing so far, and you're seeing the aspects of it that can go on to the next phase, that can be tweaked, that have to be deleted, that have to be edited. You are seeing all these things. But if you do not appraise your work, then you would not see these things. You would not be able to work on it. And apart from that, when others come around to criticize your early work, when you have already appraised it, you will not get angry, because whatever it is that they are saying, you would have already seen. So you won't get angry, you won't lose your self-esteem. If they criticize it, you won't lose your self-esteem. And if they praise it, you won't get proud, because you've already seen it before. You're fully aware. And like God, you're seeing the big picture. You have the God's eye view, the bird's eye view, like we usually call it. I like to call it the God's eye view. Right, God's eye. So needless to say, God was speaking from a standpoint of excellence, and we're going to talk about excellence in another episode, but I just had to point that out. When God said that his work was good, he was speaking from the standpoint of excellence. So you have to tell, you can tell, that his standard was high. His standard was high. And yes, I know a thought is ringing in your mind, and I'll address it very soon. But right now, what I will say is that seeing the place of each element in your work and making sure that it is good before deploying or before implementing is very essential. Very essential, because God saw that the light was good before he separated it from the darkness and made it stand alone as day. Imagine if you had a faulty light. If you had a faulty light as the sun. Or if you had a think about it. If you had a faulty light as the sun, or a faulty light as the moon, like how would it be today? It had to be good. It really had to be good. So sometimes we have elements in our work that are saying, it's something else, it will cover it. If I do like this, it will cover it. No, make it perfect. Make it good. So that even on its own, when it stands alone, it will be excellent. It will be perfect. Right? Now, if it's not good, then work at it. Don't force the attribute of good on your work, because it will show, whether you like it or not. It will show. When you're writing that article, look at it with the eyes of God, not with the eyes of imposter syndrome. The fact that you are praising your work doesn't mean that you should do that with imposter syndrome. See it for what it really is. And now, let me address what you're probably asking. So you may be thinking, how do you reconcile the fact that you said start simple, but now you say that I should be excellent? How do they align? Well, when God made the heavens and the earth, he didn't need them to be good. We didn't see anything like that there. He didn't see them as good. Bible didn't tell us that. But he had started creating. And as he went along, when he got to the light part, he needed the light to be good. Now, so here's what I see there. You may start out simple, but if you keep at it, you will grow and your standards will go higher. Personally, the way I wrote in 2015 is not the same way I wrote in 2018, and the way I wrote in 2018 is a far cry, right, to how I write right now. Very different. I have greatly improved. If I say so myself. And in the past 6 months, I've watched my social media skills improve as well. And so it's something that I would have loved in January of this year would irritate me right now. It just has to be good. So I'm going to stop right there. I'll stop right there. I will stop right there. And let's do a very short recap. So first of all, we said to start. And when you start simple. And even though your ideas or early work looks shapeless, don't be discouraged. Next, when faced with challenges or darkness in your work, instead of complaining, upskill yourself. Introduce light. And instead of throwing away the darkness, try to use it to your advantage. And instead of complaining about limited options, create more options. If this isn't clear, then please listen again, because these are some effective principles of creativity and creation. And like I said when I started this episode, you don't have to be in the creative space. You can be creative in every aspect of every industry in life. Then, of course, we talked about having the excellent mindset and appraising our work even when it's not finished yet. You ask why? Because whatever you do, do it heartily as unto God rather than men. So if you're doing something as unto God, you know it has to be befitting. All right, so think about it that way. Do your due diligence. And that's where I'll leave it, folks. The 5 principles of creation when God teaches creativity. I hope that this has blessed you. Thank you for listening. I'm always glad for the opportunity to share with you, and I hope that you will allow God to do his work in your heart with these words that you have heard. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, you're welcome. Please don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss other episodes. It's available everywhere you get your podcasts. Just search for The Bible Speaks. And for my amazing listeners, my repeat listeners, thank you so much for listening and for sharing. I appreciate you. If you have comments, feedback, or questions, please share them with me via email at hellobiblespeaks@gmail.com or send a voice message by going to anchor.fm/thebiblespeaks/message. All the links are in the description. I remain supreme. Thank you and God bless.